So the board of the Irondale Schoolhouse would like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this special presentation on early American education. Today we are privileged to have with us our guest speaker Susan Webb, Birmingham, Alabama. Susan Webb is an early American school historian, has become America's traveling schoolmarm, inspired by her mother who brought one from school.
Start out with one simple item that I put. This was kind of an afterthought, and it is a bit small, but some of you, I can tell, excuse me, by your maturity, let's say, not age, that you remember Family Circus, and it may still be, is Family Circus still in some of your newspapers if you get a newspaper? This was a cartoon from a few years ago, and sometimes it gets republished in newspapers about this time of year or when the school year starts. And if you will look at it briefly, again, you may need a magnifying glass for some of it, but it has the dad of the Family Circus with the little children, and he says, "Hey, look at this." And one of the children says, "An old abandoned one-room school, golly." And the littlest one said, oh, however did those little children those poor little children learn in that little schoolhouse? And then if you look at this carefully, they have little images of people with different professions. I actually went through, there are 25 professions entered here. There's a judge and a doctor and a teacher and a nurse and so on. And that's very true. I have a few artifacts here that I'll go through as we bring them up in some of the slides that I have here. I didn't bring everything with me, thank goodness, because I did bring all these things with me on the plane, so we kept carrying them around the Atlanta airport. I'd like to start out with this picture. Both Susan and I collect a lot of books. I collect a lot of old school books from the 1800s. So I only have very few that I brought with me today. But this was in a book that I own that documented some information about one-room schools. And it's one of my favorites. I just love, I'm not sure where the school was, but if you think of a one-room school, you might think in terms of this image. Now you're going to see that not all schools look like this. And not all schools had, which your school has, is that cupola at the top that had the bell in it. But now, this is just to give you a little idea about these early American schools. Again, we're featuring here now primarily the 18th and 19th century, all right? And typically there were one-room schools. Not all of them, but many of them were. They were usually community built. The parents were combined their resources and their energy and usually built them. I would imagine you would find that true with this school, that it took, just as in the restoration, it took a community effort. The students were at varied ages. That could depend on the school, but basically, and if I read correctly for this school, the children, depended on the year, but the children varied in age from around 4 or 5 to around 17 or 18, although those older years, most likely, there weren't very many students. As they matured, and in that era, when we did everything ourselves, built our own houses, sewed our own clothes, grew our own food, an older student or child was needed at home, the women and the boys, the girls and the boys. But that's a general age, okay? And usually, bless their hearts, as we might say in the South, there was one teacher to teach all of them. So that was a big challenge. You're going to see a sample of a schedule for a school day and how difficult that was for the teacher, because the teacher couldn't teach everybody at the same time. Little 6-year-olds didn't know how to read like, 8th grade students. So it was one teacher, and that was what I mean by rotating instruction. There might be 5 or 10 minutes for what they call arithmetic, not math, 5 or 10 minutes for reading, 5 or 10 minutes for whatever the subject was. Extremely difficult. As a former teacher, I can't imagine. And the whole day went like that. All right, this is the school that's in Norfolk. Cute, cute little school. And really it's quite small. This portion is really not part of the school. There's a little cubby hole over on this side, and they would either put the coal or the wood there for their wood-burning stove or coal-burning stove. It's a tiny school. It's well appointed. They have lots of desks. And I was telling the students this. Today's students, of course, don't know what blackboards are. Now, I think all of you do, right? That's passé now because we've got whiteboards in classrooms. But that school still has blackboards on the wall. Now, your school here is fortunate enough and that you probably would call these blackboards, but this is slate. Very heavy slate, which added to the weight of this building when it was moved. But you were lucky about that. One of our conferences, Susan was there, we visited a slate mine in upstate New York, where they don't use it for this purpose anymore, but for kitchen cabinets and so on. Now, in this little school, on 3 walls, they do have plank boards about this big that are attached to the wall. They're stained or painted black, and the teacher would write there or have the students go and write their lessons there. So that's the origin of the word blackboard. They were really boards initially, and then we went to the slate. Very, very, very cute little school. Now, we're going to look at the schoolhouse. And here in New England, it was common, I can't say everywhere, but it was common to have something that was called dame schools. And you might have an old lady like me who agreed to try to teach the children, whose parents probably didn't know how to read and write, to learn to read and write. So she would have the children in the little village come to her house, and they would try to go through what they could. Now you have to remember there were no children's books, there were no children's textbooks, so many times they used the Bible as a source for the words. This is one of the lesson plans of a program that I told you. Now this is just one sample. It could have been different in many schools. But if you can see what the teacher had to do, and Susan, I think, can zero in on a small portion of this calendar, this event. If you come close, just begin looking at 9:40 to 10 minutes reading for second level. 9:50. 9:50 to 10:05, well, we had reading and history for 3rd and 4th grade. At 10:05 to 10:20, well, we had reading and history for 5th and 6th grade. Their lessons were a little bit longer. Now this physiology and hygiene and recess, I'm not sure how that all got tied together. But from 10:45 to 10:55, 10 minutes, language and history for grade 1 and 2. And it goes on the rest of the day. Can you imagine being a teacher and making those plans and surviving that all on your own? There was only one teacher had to handle. Now, it could have been on some particular years there weren't any students, say, on the 7th grade level or the 4th grade level, so there wasn't that combining. But that's an actual schedule that I found someplace in some of my reading. And this is just an example of, in those early years, going back even to the dame schools, children had something that was called a horn book. And this is just a replica, but they were this small. It was a little wooden paddle that had a precious piece of paper. I tried to emphasize to the students today that we take for granted paper and we throw so much away. But paper was very expensive. The King of England put a high tax on it. It was hard to make back then. It wasn't convenient like it is now. And so this was the only learning tool that the early children had, because there weren't children's books, and aside from the Bible. So it has the basics on it of the alphabet, uppercase, lowercase. It has some syllables on it, and it has the Lord's Prayer, because instruction way back when was based heavily on religion. And there we go, see. Now, I've used here an example of, we talked about the slate boards on the wall, but this was a very common tool for these early students, was to have a slate board. If you see these now in craft stores, this part is usually a heavy board or cardboard. This one is not. This is slate. I say if I dropped it, it'll break, and I don't want to because it's getting close to 200 years old. But children could write on the back, front, turned it this way, and they either used a piece of limestone you know, a soft stone, or you could buy these little pencils. It's chalk, but it's a different kind of that fat, dusty chalk that we used to use in classrooms. And a common eraser was to take a piece of wool, which this is, tie it in a little bundle, and it was easy for children to erase. Or they kept a little cloth with them. Very common tool, and this was a version of this that I happened to find in Alabama. This is not slate, it's heavy cardboard, and of course it's old looking because it's 1865, I think. It's heavy pieces of cardboard that have been treated with a paint, but you could write in here with chalk, and then you could close it up so that whatever you wrote would not erase. I could go on and on and on, and I know you're very tired, so I will give you these little booklets that I made. Some have the little lessons we've talked about. Others might give you a little challenge. There's even a little word search in the back if you'd like to look for and do that exercise. But it's just so that I do have a picture in here of the before and after of the Irondale School. So at some point in time, I hope, pardon me? Yes, it is good for grandchildren and fun to talk about. But I hope, and I know all of you will, you'll continue to support this project. And I even told the students today, at some point in time, they're going to become adults, and at some point in time, they may continue to live in Middleton, so that they need to constantly report, take care of this wonderful building, because it really is a historical monument, and I hope it can continue.